Everyone, welcome back. It's good to see some old faces and good to see some new ones as well. Tonight our topic is diet and the mind. But before Brother Dwayne gets into that, I want to let you know that tomorrow night we're going to actually start at 6 with a question and answer time. And then we'll have the regular topic at 7. And then on Sunday, we told you that we were trying to get in a little bit earlier than 7 o'clock. We're going to be, if you go out the door here and you go along the buildings, the last building on the right, the last double door there, is a fellowship hall. We're going to be in there, and we're going to have the cooking class on Sunday, and that's going to start at 4 o'clock. What time? 4 o'clock. All right, so I think maybe Dwayne is going to talk a little bit, too, about, he mentioned diabetes. On the night that we talked about diabetes, he said we were going to have something even more, so I'm going to let him talk about that. All right, so let's begin with a word of prayer. Loving Father, we want to thank you for this evening and the opportunity to come and learn and grow. And Lord, take charge of our health. And so we pray that you'd give us wisdom, give us eyes to see, give us ears to hear, and Lord, show us what you'd have us do. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
No, thank you. All right, let me say good evening to everyone. Good to see you all. I'm very excited about our subject tonight, diet and the mind, and I'll go into that just a bit in a moment. As mentioned, we're going to have a special program in January, right around the New Year's, because we know that typically individuals are in a New Year's what state of mind? New Year's resolution, exactly. And so we want to go ahead and accommodate that all of us have goals and objectives we want to accomplish. And when New Year's begins, we're going to attack in a very serious way this pandemic of diabetes type 2. We have a lot of people in our country, a lot of people probably in our families and friends and co-workers and otherwise, sometimes even schoolmates that are battling with this thing called diabetes type 2. So we're going to have a program that's going to go on for the entire month of January, and it's going to be called Diabetes Undone. So if you want to know more about that, you make sure that before you leave, you just let Leah over in the back by the table, just let her know, hey, I'm interested in that. And if, I'm sure we already have your information down, we'll just put a little note to make sure to send out the notifications when the Diabetes Undone program will begin. But I'm very excited about that. I want to go ahead and start tonight when we're talking about diet and the mind. I want to tell you a little story. There was a man who was, as far as he was concerned, he probably never really battled much with any type of mental health disorder, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, none of those things. Pretty normal life, pretty high functional, married, had children, and his wife always looked at him as her strong man, and the children always looked at him as super dad. And so he, for the most part, lived the great majority of his life really, really mentally sound. Well, one day he ended up just kind of waking up in the morning and felt like a cloud was over his head. And all of a sudden he became very timid, very afraid, easily afraid and shaken. He got to a point that he couldn't even go past a graveyard without going into terrible panic because he developed a tremendous fear of death. He started to think about death all the time. He actually would think about death hundreds and hundreds of times throughout the day. Started hearing things in his mind that was telling him that God doesn't love you, you're going to die, and your wife is going to move on and marry somebody else and replace you. Your children will call somebody else daddy. And, these things were plaguing his mind. And then every little thing that he went through, he thought was a big deal. If he had a stomach ache, he thought he had pancreatic cancer. If he had a headache. He thought he had brain cancer. And his wife even looked at him one time with tears in her eyes and said to him, you know, what happened to my strong man? His children were so impacted by seeing their dad, you know, in this broken state that the children began to question even God and God's power, because their dad evidently loved the Lord. Their dad was one who always talked about God, but now they're thinking, wow, if dad is going through all of this and he's so strong with God, what chance do we have? So it began to discourage his children's faith. And it went on for a couple of years that he went into deep depression, sitting in a room, not wanting to leave his house, crying all the time for no reason. And all he could do was think of the worst of things. What do you think about a story like that? It's pretty sad, isn't it? You ask the question, is it true? It's 100% true. You know why? Because it was me. Really? This was the experience that I had in the year of 2016. 2016 is the year I will never forget. It was like one day I just woke up and it's like a cloud was just over my head. And I became a completely different person. Family, you know, and I'm not here to boast about this, but I had a sawed-off shotgun faced at me one time, and somebody shot it. I had somebody take a 9mm Glock pistol, and they shot it at me. I had situations where I got hit by cars and got into tons and tons of fights in my youth. I have faced a lot of things, including death, but nothing ever got me to this broken state. But all of a sudden in 2016, I became familiar with anxiety. I became familiar with depression. I became familiar with panic attacks. When my wife was driving and we got to a place on the road where I could see no buildings or what have you, and literally my heart just started going up into the hundreds in its beats per minute, and I had to get out the car because I felt like I was suffocating. Really serious mental torment. But the reality is, or shall I say the good news is that in 2018, it all just leveled. It went away. I was able to overcome it, and I got my mind back. And it came back new and improved. But I will tell you this. I remember that I developed a tremendous amount of compassion for individuals who go through mental health disorders. It made me go to the point that I said, by the grace of God, if I ever get a chance, I'm going to put money to get a facility right out here in California, something that is adjacent to the Rosevilles, the Sacramentos, and all the other areas. And I want to have a place where we can help address the challenges that individuals face dealing with the mind, where we can address it from 4 standpoints: biological, psychological, environmental, and spiritual. Because these were the 4 disciplines that I had to learn in order for me to get to that place that I could stand here before you with no cloud over my head. I had to address the biological. I had to address the psychological. I had to address the environmental, and I had to address the spiritual. Once I addressed all 4 of those phases, I found the key of how someone can get victory over these terrible things that can plague the mind. And I remember there was a man, he's like a father figure in my life, and he put his hands on me and looked me right in the eyes, and he calls me son. And he said, son, he said, when you are healed from this, he said, you are going to be amazed at how many people are going through this, not just in the world, but in the church. And it was from that moment that I made a covenant with God, that I said, for the rest of my life, I will not just simply give the gospel to people, but I will give the gospel of health. I will make sure that people know the good news that God is here not just to deliver the soul, but to deliver the mind. And so when I say that when I present this subject that I speak with so much passion on it, I mean, I just want you to know that there's nothing like having a free mind. It's a gift to be able to be free in your thinking and to not have dominant thoughts and voices and other things that are plaguing us and where we have to fight every day. I meet people sometimes, I say, how are you doing? And they say, I'm doing great. And they say that because they're still in the process of trying to convince themselves that they're actually doing great because there's a voice already in their head telling them you're doing horrible. But do you know how sweet it is when you can say, how do you feel? And you can say, I'm doing great. And from your heart, you can truly say, I'm doing great because I'm doing great. And so I believe personally, very, very personal, I believe God allowed, not ordained. There's a difference. I don't believe God ordained for me to go through what I went through. But he allowed it to happen. And he had a plan to get me out of it. And he got me out of it. And ever since 2016, he's been using me to help other people get out of it. And so when I truly say that standing here before you, 51 years young, I can already tell you my life is extremely fulfilling because I get to do something that I love and have so much passion for, and it serves for both time as well as eternity. What could possibly beat that? And so here it is that when we talk about diet and the mind, I just want to go into this. Folks, mental health disorders are at an all-time high. You know, it was already bad before 2020. But we all know what happened the spring of 2020, right? Something came not merely in our world, something came that changed our world forever. And it was called COVID-19, right? But you will be amazed. What a lot of people don't know is that this statistic was not brought out as much, but it certainly deserved our attention. When the lockdowns took place, who could forget the lockdowns, right? When those lockdowns took place, did you know that domestic violence went up 30 to 40%? Because for a lot of husbands and wives, work was escape. Work was an escape from that person that they're married to, but they really couldn't stand. But when they got locked down, all of a sudden they had to deal with each other. And so they could not help but to notice domestic violence started to go up. Now, here's a really sad one. Child molestation went up 30% during the lockdowns. During the lockdowns. And mental health disorders got us to the place that now, even post-COVID, it is at an all-time high. Notice. An alarming new report has unveiled a troubling reality in the United States mental health crisis. More than 1 in 6 adults say they are depressed or being treated for depression, the highest level ever recorded since Gallup first started tracking the condition, May 17, just this year. And that's just depression. If we were to start going into all of the other areas of life, we would see it even more. Now, it said 1 in 6 adults. But one of the things that also caught my attention is how depression was not just affecting adults, it's affecting young people. The statistics are all over the table. It says adolescent depression is on the rise. The National Institute of Mental Health reports that about 3.2 million 12 to 17-year-olds have had at least one major depressive episode within the past 12 months. Survey responses for more than 200,000 youth ages 12 to 17 between 2005 and 2017, and approximately 400,000 adults between 2008 and 2017 were reviewed. And what researchers discovered was alarming. For youth, major depression increased 52% from 2005 to 2017, and it rose 63% in young adults 18 to 25. So I would like to let you know that we're living in a very interesting society. And as I'm privileged to be a health worker, I'm also a minister. And as a minister, I'm really asking God on a daily basis and asking colleagues and otherwise, like, what are the ways to really win a lot of young men and young women today? And the reason I say that is because when I was young, I would go to school and guys would do this shoulder thing. You probably know nothing about this. But there was this shoulder thing. Like if one guy was walking this way and I'm walking this way, the guy would take his shoulder and he would just go boom, and he would hit you with his shoulder. So imagine you're walking minding your business, somebody just hits you with their shoulder, right? And then they would look at me like, what do you want to do about it? And I could remember getting into some fights. I could remember, my dad who yelled at times. I could remember a lot of negative experiences in my youth, but I would have to say it never broke me. If anything, it kind of built me up a little bit. And I think there's a lot of adults today that can look back in our past and say, we can remember tough times, but it didn't break us. We brunted through it, learned some powerful lessons, and moved on. But I'm not joking when I say this. If a young person today puts up an Instagram post, and if very few people like it, they start becoming suicidal. Don't tell me we are not living in a different time in Earth's history. People are more fragile than they've ever been. Young people, teenagers, young adults, very, very fragile. And the reason why I'm bringing this point up is because look at the statistics. Suicide rates for 15 to 19-year-olds and those between 20 and 24 are at their highest level since 2000. A new study reports suicides among teens have especially spiked, with an annual percentage change of 10% between 2014 and 2017 for 15 to 19-year-olds. Bottom paragraph, it really is an unprecedented surge, said lead author Orrin Myron, a research associate at Harvard Medical School in Boston. You can go back decades and you won't find such a sharp increase. It's like we're living in a different time zone. And the techniques and the methods that sometimes we would use to have straight talk with folks, we're finding that there's a generation of young people today that when we have these same type of straight talks like our parents used to give us, they're not handling it as well as some of us used to handle it. And this is a reality. I would put it all under the term that Jesus said a long time ago. Jesus said, an enemy hath done this. And I would agree. But this is where we're seeing a lot of people today, very, very fragile, very easy to get hurt, and very hard to build back up and making extreme decisions. I went to go do an evangelism series in Georgia. And when I went there, there was a family there that I knew for many, many years. I knew the husband and wife, I knew their children. And I went to go do this evangelism series the other year ago, and the young daughter was there. Beautiful young lady, sweetheart. And she was there and singing before I would come up and share the messages and everything else. And, I remember the parents telling me, hey, pray for her. She's kind of going through some things, what have you. Sure, of course. But then the reality kicked in this year. It was this year in January that young lady at 17 years old decided to take her own life. And these statistics really came home to me because I didn't have anybody that was that close to me. And she and I weren't like the closest of close, but I knew her, she knew me. I've known her for years. I've watched her grow up for the most part. And, it began to hit me like this thing is getting pretty serious. This thing is getting very serious out there. And so the reality is that, like I said, I can't tell you how thankful I am. And actually, I feel bad because tonight's subject is diet and the mind. I wish I could talk to you about all of it. Because like I told you, there's biological. That's where we get into a little bit about diet. But there's still the psychological. There's still the environmental. There's still a lot of the spiritual that we won't be able to cover. And therefore, if you want to talk, especially with me about it, like I said, I don't have it with me right now, but all of you should have had a card given to you that you can fill it out and put your name and your number there. And then we can set up a time that if you want, we can talk about it. I'm the father of 4 children. They're all in their 20s. My precious daughter, Jada, will be 22 next week. And that will be my youngest child. My oldest will be 25. And, I'm realizing as parents, my wife and I, we have very real talks with our children. Like, hey, listen, if you are ever going through such and such and such, please, you can come to mom and dad, right? And you don't know how good it makes me feel when my children call me and say, Dad, Mom, can I talk to you? And I say, yes. And they said, I had some things on my mind. And I just feel like, thank God. Today, when young children or young adult children want to talk to their parents about what's going on in their mind, that's a good plus. You don't want your children to just constantly stay quiet and just keep acting like everything's okay when they're possibly going through a lot of mental turmoil. And so I just want to give that little encouragement to all of us as parents in the room that, do all that you can to make sure you keep those communication lines very open with your children, because it's a rough world out there. It's a rough world out there. People are suffering. Now, if there is another group that is also going through a lot of, various mental health challenges, it's men. And one of the things about men is, depending on your understanding of manhood, somebody might have said something that's actually not true, and that is that you are somehow less of a man if you begin to acknowledge going through certain mental health challenges. I am here to let all the men in this room, and there's quite a few of us here, I'm just here to let you know that that is not true. You are 100% a real man if you say, hey, I have some weaknesses, I have some battles, I have some challenges, and I need somebody to talk to. I need somebody to pray for me. I need to probably get some medical help. There is a climb in mental health disorders among men. It says, while mental illnesses affect both men and women, the prevalence of mental illnesses in men is often lower than women. Men with mental illnesses are also less likely to have received mental health treatment than women in the past year. However, watch this. Men are more likely to die by suicide than women, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Recognizing the signs that you or someone you love may have a mental disorder is the first step toward getting treatment. The earlier that treatment begins, the more effective it can be. So it's really, really important that we need to encourage men to create an atmosphere where we don't make men feel like they're less than men because of the fact that they're going through certain battles. You are not less than a man. I'm just letting you know that. I'm thankful that whatever it is that my father instilled in me, both my earthly father and heavenly, when I started to go through my mental health crisis, I reached out. I think that's one of the reasons I'm standing here before you, healed, is because I reached out. I made efforts to say, look, I got some thoughts going on in my head and I don't like what's going on right now and I think I need some help. And I was able to just do that, and I'm just glad I had a wife that didn't look at me and say, look at you, you shame of a man, you weakling, things like that. No, she didn't do any of that. She was 100% supportive. And so it is that I hope that such would be reflected if, God forbid, any of the men in this room were going through these battles. The male mental health crisis gap, there's a lot going on here. Let me go ahead and put the magnifying glass. Look at this. It says of all suicides in 2017, 75% were male. Of all of them, 75% were men who did it. Now, look at this little middle gap here where it says 40%. These are some of the things a lot of men say as to why they don't want to pursue help. 1, I don't wish to burden anyone. 2, I don't want to appear weak. That's called pride. 3, I've learned to deal with it. 4, I have no one to talk to. 5, I'm too embarrassed. I want to encourage you to rise above these things, to pursue past these things, okay? There's always somebody you can talk to. There's always somebody that you can reach out to. Don't go through this stuff alone and quiet and become another silent sufferer, okay? Very, very important. So what's the reality? The reality is very simple, that this, ladies and gentlemen, is the battleground. I mean, just all the statistics makes this clear, doesn't it? All the statistics make it very, very clear that this is the battleground, the mind. The mind is the battleground. And this is what we're in right now. There's often a concept that's called the Great Controversy. Okay? You may or may not have heard of that before, but there's a lot of people who believe in a concept called a great controversy, or the great controversy. And the reality is that the great controversy is a very spiritual term. It's a very spiritual term. And it's between Christ and Satan. Okay? These themes come from the Bible. Okay? But often what a lot of people don't understand is that the reality is that there is a great controversy between Christ and Satan, but it's over the human mind. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. Both, for those of us who are spiritual, if you're not spiritual, you don't believe in the Bible or those type of things, no condemnation. That's okay. Everybody believes things differently. But in the Christian community, of just which I'm a part of, I'm just giving this for you to just think about. In the Christian community, we believe that there is a great controversy, a frustration, a battle, a fight, and it is between Christ and Satan, but it's over humanity's mind. Both God and Satan want access to the human mind. And it's very simple. The reason is, whoever has the mind has the man. That's the whole reason why. Whoever has the mind has the man. Now, when it comes to, God having our minds, I'd like to think that we would have good thoughts. Like, oh, well, certainly that should be good things. But unfortunately, if it was true that the enemy wants to have access to our minds, it would evidently be for bad things. But there's a history that a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to that's actually written in Scripture that I want to go ahead and introduce this to you as another thought, because I'm going to be honest with you. If you talk to the modern day psychiatrist, the modern day psychologist, the modern day psychotherapist, and all the other mental health professionals, if you ask them, why is all of this stuff happening? Mass shootings, serial killers, people committing suicide at unprecedented amounts. Why is this happening? You know what a lot of them say? We don't know. And I think that part of the reason for that is because sooner or later, you have to look outside of biological, psychological, and environmental. And there's only one thing left: spiritual. And that's the reason why when you hit all four, you're bound to have the greatest success. So I want you to watch this. I began to think about it. What's his? Now, the his is dealing with the enemy, right? This enemy of Christ, the enemy of humanity. He's better known as the devil and Satan. What's his specific tool to get access to the mind? What is the tool that he uses? I'm going to show you a little bit of sacred history that you probably caught or didn't catch, but if you didn't catch it, you'll catch it tonight. Take a look at this. In Genesis 3, it says, "For God does know that in the day you" what? "Eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." The serpent used appetite. Then, when you look at this story in Daniel, when all of the faithful servants of God were taken captive into the Babylonian kingdom, look at what happened in Daniel 1. And you got to think about this. There were three things that was done. The king wanted to change Daniel's name, and the king wanted to change Daniel's method of education. On neither one of those did Daniel ever protest. He never said, "Don't you call me that pagan name. My name's Daniel." He never did that. He accepted it. When they taught false education, Daniel said, "No problem." But when it came to changing Daniel's diet, that's the first time you see Daniel say, "Okay, now I'm going to have to give an open protest." It says in Daniel 1, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portions of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." That was the first time that Daniel made an open protest. It was on diet. Then, of course, you'll remember the man Jesus himself. When he came on the scene, what was his first temptation? "Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread." So notice that when you just look at biblical history, one of the most successful access points for the enemy to get access to the people's mind was through the point of appetite. It was through the point of appetite. Now, some people read their Bibles before and never caught that point. But you caught it tonight. Caught it tonight. And that's the reason why we talk about not just merely dealing with the mind, but we need to talk about diet and the mind. Because whether we're looking at it spiritually or whether we're looking at it in the natural world, often if you want to get access to people's minds, you do it through their diet. Now let's talk about it. Does food really affect the mind anyhow? You know, a lot of people would say no, and it's typically the people that don't study food. Isn't that something? You know, it's like you ask them, does food affect the mind? And often people say, no, 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 no. Like, here it is. I just showed you spiritually how food affects the mind and these type of things. But what about science? Does science show that food can affect the mind? What does science say about this? Washington Post put out a beautiful article. Can what you eat affect your mental health? And look at what they said. New research. I was like, new? I was like, it's as old as the Bible. But I don't know. They said new. They said new research links diet and the mind. Now watch this. Here it is. It says research exploring the link between diet and mental health is a very new field. Okay, very new field. The first papers only came out just a few years ago, said Michael Burke, professor of psychiatry at the Deakin University School of Medicine in Australia. He said, but the results are unusually consistent. Now I want you to look at this last sentence very carefully. It says the results are unusually consistent and they show a link between diet quality and mental health. What was the common element? The common element seems to be whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods. If you wanted to know what should my diet be if I'm battling with mental health disorders or if I want to avoid mental health disorders, your diet should consist of whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense, heavy, loaded with nutrients, nutrient-dense foods. This is what our diet should consist of, which means that you're going to have to tell your taste buds to take a break. Because let's face it, the taste buds like things that are not necessarily whole, unprocessed, and nutrient-dense. Did you see this picture before? If you want to know how to make my knees shake, right? Let's say you just weren't my friend and you said, I just want to make Dwayne buckle. I want to make him crumble right now. All you got to do is put that right in front of me. I'm telling you, I got a weakness for donuts. I mean, donuts is one of my most favorite pastries on planet Earth. Now, I've been plant-based for over 25 years, but do you know what the plant-based world has now done? They've made plant-based donuts, and they're right inside of Whole Foods. And I mean, I don't know if you ever sunk your teeth into one of those, but they taste just like the original thing. I mean, it is amazing. I feel like I'm getting Dunkin' Donut flashbacks, you know, Krispy Kreme flashbacks. It's just amazing how people can now make a vegan donut. Now, that's my weakness. I don't know what yours is. Maybe you have a weakness as well, something that when they just put it in front of your nose and you just, you know, all of a sudden the legs start getting weak, you know, you find yourself just kind of battling. Okay? So when we talk about diet and the mind and food affecting us and all of this, you know, this is a hard thing to do, to eat food that's whole, unprocessed, nutrient dense. It's gonna make us not always give in to what the taste buds want. Depending on how your diet is, a lot of us love salt, we love grease and fat, we love sugar, and we love blood. Now somebody says, what? Did you just call me a vampire? No, I didn't call you a vampire. But what a lot of people don't know is this. How many of us in this room have ever eaten at a kosher restaurant? Anybody ever eaten at a kosher restaurant? Okay, one? Just one. There's a lot of us here. If you ever go to a Jewish establishment and you eat at a kosher restaurant, and let's say you order chicken, right? If you order chicken and say, I'd like a baked chicken, please, they're going to go ahead and bring you your chicken. Might look good, but then when you bite into it, you're going to say, excuse me. And you're going to call the waiter back and you're going to say, I ordered chicken. This tastes like a leather belt. And you know why you're going to say that? Because in Jewish culture, they did not just kill the animal, cook it, and then feed it. They would have to go through this process called kosherization, which is taking the blood that is still mingled in the meat and extracting that blood out of the meat. So when a lot of people eat kosherized chicken, they often liken it to the taste of a leather belt. It doesn't have anything close to the flavor of what we're used to with chicken. So what was the lesson being taught with that? It's not necessarily the chicken that has all that flavor in it. It's the blood in the chicken that's creating a lot of that flavor. And so that's why I said a lot of us who might be meat lovers in the room, okay, this is not a condemnation. This is all about education, okay? No condemnation, just education. A lot of times, whether we realize it or not, it's the blood that's giving the flavor to the meat that we like so much. It's not necessarily the meat. And so it is that because of these things, whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods might be a challenge for all of us. But I say that it's always easier to overcome a challenge when people do things together. And that's the reason why I want to encourage you to join us on Sunday, where we're actually going to do a cooking class, a plant-based cooking class, where we're going to have cheese, we're going to have meat products or meat alternatives, we're going to have pastries, we're going to have all of that stuff, but it's all going to be made from nutrient-dense foods. It's going to be made from whole foods. It's going to include things that you'll probably say, wait a minute, you mean to tell me cashews can produce that? And that's why I get so excited whenever we do our cooking classes. People love it. And my wife and I have done this all over the world, not just the country, but in the world. And so you'll see that these things are just really, really awesome, okay? But this is the goal. If I want to address mental health disorders, one of the first things that I would do is I would say, okay, we're going to move away from a lot of the processed foods. We're going to move away from a lot of the artificial foods. We're going to move away, yes, even to a degree, from a lot of the animal foods. And we're going to start including a diet that is more whole, unprocessed, and loaded with nutrients. Now, it is possible. You know, broccoli is a great food. But if you drown it, and you know what we do sometimes, right? When we cook our vegetables, what do we do when the vegetables are ready in the pot after we cooked it? We usually take the pot and we go somewhere with it. Anybody knows where we go? We go to the sink. And when we go to the sink, what do we do at the sink? We pour out the water. And do you know what's going down the drain? A lot of the nutrients that was in the broccoli. And that's why we have to pour all this salt and butter and all these other flavors all over the broccoli, because we stripped it. So that's why, again, you don't just want it to be whole foods. You have to think about how you prepare it. So we'll talk about that on Sunday. What are the ways you can prepare your food that it allows the nutrients to remain in it, so that way it's whole, unprocessed, and nutrient dense? Take a look at this. Like an expensive car, your brain functions best when it gets only premium fuel. Eating high quality foods that contain lots of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants nourishes the brain and protects it from oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is the bad guy, okay? It protects it from oxidative stress, the waste of free radicals produced when the body uses oxygen, which can damage cells. So when you eat your food, you really want it to be whole, unprocessed, nutrient dense. You want it to have lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, lots of antioxidants, okay? We're talking about diet and the mind. So what can we do? What are some things that we can do? Number one thing, like I said, that I'm really a strong believer in is education. Get educated. If you don't know, go figure it out. If you don't know, go learn it. Something new, something exciting to discover, okay? Now, I'm going to put these two faces on the screen, beginning with education. A lot of people are either sad or glad, you know, sad or glad. Now, obviously, we want to do everything possible to move from sad to glad. Would you agree? Now, SAD is an acronym. Anybody know what SAD stands for? SAD. We're talking about diet. What do you think about when you think of SAD? Salad. Salad makes you sad? Salad's supposed to make you happy. Okay, well, here we go. Here goes SAD. Ready? Standard American diet. Okay? SAD. In a lot of health environments and medical environments, the word SAD stands for Standard American Diet. That's SAD. So what we want to do is we want to move from sad to what? We want to move to glad. So I wonder if SAD is the acronym for Standard American Diet, then I wonder what glad is. So, you know, again, one side is sad, some other side is glad. Somebody says, well, that's just relative. Because I don't know, some people love burgers and fries and pizza and everything else. I mean, you know, hey. But here's the reality, okay? SAD stands for Standard American Diet. GLAD stands for God's Life Activating Diet. And so the idea is to move from SAD and get closer and closer and closer to GLAD. Not just emotionally, but dietetically as well. Is to get to that point, I'm moving from Standard American Diet, and I want to move towards God's Life Activating Diet. Okay? This is where you start to get a great deal of fulfillment. So let's talk about that. The dietary guidelines for Americans states that the average American diet consists of excess sodium, saturated fat, refined grains, and calories from solid fats and added sugars. This is the average American diet. This is the average restaurant that we all have access to, from the Golden Arches to the KFC to the Burger Kings, Subways, and the many, many other places that are out there, okay? According to the United States Department of Agriculture estimates, 32% of our calories, listen to this, this is not good. 32% of our calories comes from animal foods, 57% from processed plant foods, and only 11% from whole grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, and nuts. That means on a scale of 1 to 10, the American diet would rate about a 1. And we wonder why the hospitals are loaded. And I don't know if you've been to the ER anytime recently. That is a very, very sad place. You know, it's a very sad place. So much suffering. And you think to yourself that a lot of that suffering, hear me good what I'm about to say here, a lot of that suffering is self-inflicted. You know? Not that the people woke up and said, I want to hurt myself. It's not so much that, even though there's some of that too, sadly. But a lot of times, it's because people just don't know. I mean, look at this room. There's a good number of us here tonight, but look at how much more space there is for others. See, this is the thing that's always on my mind. It's like, wow, there's so much more people that need to know this. 7 years ago, I had heart surgery. When I was a child, when I was about 8, I had rheumatic fever. And the bacteria from the rheumatic fever, if it's not put in check, it can damage your heart valve, okay? So that's what happened. It damaged my heart valve. So decades and decades and decades go by, and here it is that I eventually have to get heart surgery. And I remember that when I was getting surgery done, there was another family there as well. The nurse kept coming back to both of our families. The nurse came back to my family and said, he's doing great. They're wrapping up. You'll see him soon. The nurse did not come back for the other family. The doctor came back. And you and I both know that typically when the doctor has to come back, there's probably some pretty impacting news that he has to give. That doctor came back and had to inform the family that your mother, your wife, who was in the OR, unfortunately died right on the table. And boy, did they break down crying and everything. My wife was gone, but my oldest son, Jared, he was there, and all my other children. And my son, Jared, went to them and said, do you mind if we pray with you? And my son began to pray with them and pray for them because their hearts were so devastated. And, and I remember walking through the critical cardiac care unit. And I'm walking around. Thank God. The nurse said, you're the healthiest person inside of this entire critical cardiac care unit. But I remember seeing so many people there, just in terrible condition. One of them was like half my age. He was young. And I'm thinking to myself that sometimes, family, you don't know, but the health practices you're doing right now is preparing you for the crisis ahead that you know nothing about. And so it's not always about being diagnosed with a disease and then doing all of this stuff. Sometimes it's about prevention. I'm here to let you know prevention is better than cure. Prevention is actually better than cure. And so what you want to do is you want to start doing all you can to take charge of your health, to make sure you're not in this category here where you're a level 1, because you don't know if somebody's going to run that red light tomorrow. And I'm not here to put fear in anyone's heart. Believe me when I say that. But the realities of life says that it's very easy to find yourself in a hospital when you did not expect it. And so why don't we go ahead and start getting ready now, just in case? You understand that? Let's make good decisions now, just in case that hydration might benefit us more than we realize. That nutrient-dense food might benefit us more than we realize. So let's look at this. The Mayo Clinic put together this beautiful little statement where they said overall mental illnesses, although the exact cause of most mental illnesses is not known, it is becoming clear through research that many of these conditions are caused by a combination of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. For our study tonight, we're just going to consider biological, just for tonight. Like I said, there's way more. I have far more material. If you'd like to meet and we can talk about it, I'd be happy to. But let's go ahead and look at this. Let's talk about our happy hormones, okay? When we talk about our happy hormones, dopamine, as an example, helps you to feel mentally alert. The lack of it might cause lack of attention, lack of concentration, and bad moods. Now watch this. Dopamine can be released by eating foods that are what? Rich in protein. There are 4 things that you should always have on your plate when you're eating a meal. 4 things. Complex carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals, healthy fats, healthy proteins. When you look at your plate, I've so trained my mind on this that when I eat a plate of food, I can see it a mile away. I'll be able, I methodically put it on my plate that I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this on. That's my complex carb. Okay, there's my good fats. Yep, this is where I get all my vitamins and minerals. Aha, here's my proteins. And then I go to my table and I sit down and dive in. But you want to make sure that the food that you're eating, if you're wanting to be intentional of having good mental health, you want to make sure that there's a portion on your plate that is rich in proteins, okay? Rich in good proteins. Now, there's a lot out there in the world of plant-based proteins. I'll talk about that on Sunday because I'm not talking about animal protein. Animal protein can be overwhelming to our systems if we're not careful, okay? Because our bodies are only made to handle but so much protein, and typically on an animal-based diet, you'll find that you're getting a lot. Now, if you enjoy, like I did growing up, meat for breakfast, meat for lunch, meat for dinner, meat for snacks. That's how I grew up. Lots and lots and lots and lots of meat, okay? So what does that mean? That means that for you, maybe the goal is not to just say, away with the meat. Maybe that's not the goal. But maybe if you're having meat for breakfast, meat for lunch, and meat for dinners, and meat for snacks, maybe we might start the first step by saying, how about we try not to do as much meat for snacks? And then let it just be breakfast, lunch, dinner. And then maybe after that, maybe you'll go ahead and say, okay, no longer for dinner, now just for breakfast and lunch. So don't worry. It may not be that you have to do a complete total elimination, but at least begin scaling back from loading yourself up with too much that can ultimately cause harm. But this is for dopamine, okay? Now there's another one called ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone that reduces stress, okay? It reduces stress and can help you become more relaxed. Ghrelin is released when we become hungry. That's why eating too much is not always a good idea. Just eat according to your body's needs and never fill your stomach completely in order to maintain good ghrelin levels. So ghrelin is another good hormone that can help us mitigate stress and get that good mental health. But what can complicate this hormone of ghrelin? If we overeat. So therefore, I'd like to recommend a new rule for us, and this is the most perfect thing for you to remember as Thanksgiving is right around the corner. Are you ready? Here's a good rule to remember. Eat until you're satisfied, not until you're full. You got that? Eat until you're satisfied, not until you're full. Don't eat until you're just saying, like, your jacket was buttoned up. You know how this thing goes. Sometimes we eat food, jacket's all buttoned up, and by the time we're eating, we're like, whoo, man, whoo, you got to unbutton the jacket, let that belly just pop on out, because we're like, I can't take another bite lest I pop. If you are there, you're eating too much, you're going to affect your ghrelin, and it's going to mitigate that ability to handle the stress. So if somebody really wants to go ahead and be intentional about gaining better mental health, stop overeating. Start trying to train your mind. I'm just going to eat till I'm satisfied. What does that look like? You're eating food and you're like, oh, this is good. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is so good. And you're just enjoying that food. But you get to a point in that meal where you're like, you know what, this is good. And yes, there is a little bit left on the plate. And I understand culture is big here, okay? Depending on the culture you come from, it is very disrespectful if you don't finish everything on your plate. I understand that. But we just got to try to work with that. But if you know that you're eating your food, you have food left on the plate, but you're saying to yourself, you know, this was fantastic. I enjoyed this. I could eat more, but I would be just fine if I stopped right here. That's eating until you're satisfied. Just stop. Wrap it up and eat it later maybe. But that's the idea, is eat until you're satisfied, not until you're full. Serotonin, big one, okay? This is our happy hormone. Serotonin is sometimes called the happiness hormone. Serotonin regulates the mood, prevents depression, and makes you feel happy. Serotonin can be released by getting exposed to sunlight. And that's why sometimes you want to get up in the morning, get some exposure to the sunlight, helps a lot, but also by eating foods rich in carbohydrates. So this is where now your whole grains and things of that nature come in. Your cereals, your breads, and all of those different things. That's where that comes in now. Get those carbs in, but remember, complex carbohydrates, the whole grain, not the strip grain, all right? Now, over time, overeating may harm brain function, okay? Several studies tie continual overeating and obesity to mental decline in older adults compared with those who do not overeat. One study in older adults found that being overweight negatively affected memory compared with normal weight individuals. So again, guard yourselves against overeating. In the Bible, there was a word for it. It was called glutton, okay? Gluttony. So you want to be very careful about overeating. It can start causing chemical imbalances. And it begins to push us back from having that beautiful, clear mental health that we all want so badly, okay? So watch out for that. In Advancing Science, they put together this pretty awesome study here. A new study released by the American Association for the Advancement of Science shows that overeating effectively cuts the brakes on the brain's ability to reduce food intake and can therefore cause neurological changes that lead to obesity, a disease that affects more than 500 million adults worldwide. So sometimes, again, overeating begins to train the brain to say, okay, so we're going to do this again and again and again. And we start developing this habit of overeating, and it can create some problems. Then, of course, the big one. High foods, high in trans fatty acids. Deep fried, a lot of fried stuff, okay? I know that French fries are vegan, but they're still not necessarily good for you. I always tell people, just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's good for you. Remember, alcohol is vegan, but it's not good for you, right? It's not good for you. So you want to be careful. Don't just say, oh, it's vegan, it's okay. No, it may not be okay. Now, what I'm not saying is that you cannot have occasionally something like this. If you know you've been a good boy or a good girl and you've had a lot of time go by, you're doing great, your blood levels look fantastic, and you say, today I'd like to treat myself to a donut. Today I'd like to treat myself to some French fries. That will not kill you. Go ahead and enjoy your food just fine. But the reality is that if you know that you're eating too much of this 1, 2, 3, 4 times a week, you're finding yourself getting fried foods in and these type of things, now you're getting too much of those trans fatty acids. What comes with this, right? Take a look. Omega-3s. I taught you all about this earlier in the week. I'm going to share it again. If there's one thing that you and I need in order to have good mental health is get all of your omega-3s in, okay? The 3 main omega-3 fatty acids are ALA, EPA, and DHA. Now, ALA is found mainly in plant oils like flaxseed, soybean, canola, but your body it can convert the ALA into EPA and then DHA, but it's only in very small amounts. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. So, Psychology Today put out this study. Studies have shown that high levels of trans fats may reduce serotonin production in the brain, leading to depression as well as adversely affecting memory. That's one of the reasons why, if you know people that are depressed, keep them away from fried foods. It's working against them, it's not working for them. You understand that? Because the more that an individual eats more trans fatty acids, watch this, the more that you eat trans fatty acids, it's going to help produce more oxidative stress. Okay? Watch this. We have shown that ellatic acid upregulates NADPH, oxidizes component. From these findings, we infer that dietary trans fatty acids accumulates in plasma and various tissues and directly promotes inflammation and oxidative stress. So the more fried foods we're getting in, it's going to increase the oxidative stress, which is going to deplete your ability to absorb omegas, the omega-3s. And you need the omega-3s in order to have good, solid mental health. But you need not only ALA, you need EPA and DHA. That's why when I put this up on the screen here, these are your plant-based sources of omega-3s, but I want you to look carefully, okay? Brussels sprouts, flax seeds, chia, hemp seeds, walnuts, those are going to give you ALA, but they're not going to really give you your EPA, DHA. Seaweed, algae, and spirulina are going to give you some of your EPA, DHA, but if you're eating it, you're going to get it in very small amounts. So if you want to really make sure that your omegas are all at optimum level, you want to eat a good amount of flax seeds, chia, walnuts, etc. Definitely have that, but I would like to recommend, please, go get yourself a supplement. Get yourself, this is for those of us who are plant-based. If you eat fish, then yes, your salmon for sure is going to work out very good for you in giving you all of your omegas. But if you're plant-based, you definitely want to go ahead and use a supplement that is DHA and EPA. The one that I use, you can get it on Amazon, is called Quell, Q-W-E-L-L. You can order it right from Amazon. It's in a blue bottle. It's called Quell. And what I like about it is the one plant-based omega-3 EPA DHA supplement that does not use carrageenan. Carrageenan has been known to potentially be carcinogenic. So that's the reason why some people are intentional of trying to get an EPA DHA supplement that is plant-based but does not have carrageenan. Quell can do that. So that's just for any of you that might be plant-based, and if you're looking for a supplement, that would be good. Let's bring it down to a close. Tryptophan, whatever you're doing, when you eat your food, you want to make sure that they're high in tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid that serves several important purposes, like nitrogen balance in adults and growth in infants. It also creates niacin, which is essential in creating the neurotransmitter serotonin. The more tryptophan, the more serotonin, and it helps fight the depression. Okay? So when we talk about this, what are some high tryptophan foods? Well, here they are. These are all high tryptophan foods, okay? It doesn't mean you eat them all, but this is what's on the table. All of these foods are high in tryptophan. Number one, you have cage-free eggs, okay? High in tryptophan. Spirulina, high in tryptophan. Wild-caught fish like cod and salmon, high in tryptophan. Pasture-raised poultry, high. 100% whole grain oats, brown rice, corn, or quinoa, high in tryptophan. Grass-fed beef or lamb, high in tryptophan. Sesame seeds, cashews, and walnuts, very high in tryptophan. Organic, ideally raw dairy products like milk, yogurt, cottage cheese, and raw cheeses, that's high in tryptophan. Beans, legumes, chickpeas, green peas, etc., they're high in tryptophan. Potatoes, very high in tryptophan, and bananas, very high in tryptophan. So if you are trying to really combat going into mental health decline, then you want to make sure that you're eating foods that are high in tryptophan, okay? Because it's going to help that serotonin production that's going to allow you to be at a greater place of health to fight off, unfortunately, some of those things that comes along with mental health disorders. I remember that sometimes, there's always these debates, animal foods, plant foods. I am a large advocate of plant foods because the research is clear as day that the more whole plant-based foods that an individual eats, you're giving yourself the greatest opportunity for whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods without the bad. So let me give you an example. You see here, grass-fed beef or lamb, right? High in tryptophan. But tonight's Friday night. Wednesday night we did cancer. What cancer are you 30% or more susceptible to getting if you eat red meat? Colon cancer. You understand that? That's what I'm talking about. So here it is. You're eating the beef so you can avoid going into mental health disorders, but now you're making yourself far more susceptible to potentially developing colon cancer. That's not a real solution. A real solution is when you have all good and no bad. And so that's the only reason why you'll hear me often say, okay, if you want to eat the meat, go ahead and eat it. Try to be as responsible as you can. Get the best quality meat, etc., if you're going to do it. But if you can try to start looking into more plant-based, that's where you're going to find all good with no bad. But unfortunately, with the dairy world, the egg world, the meat world, you're going to constantly run into good and bad. Good and bad. If you're hypertensive, egg yolk is very bad for you because it's extremely high in sodium, extremely high in fat. You understand that? So that's the only reason why you'll see that. Now, where do we get this from? Neil deGrasse Tyson said, we are literally stardust. I remember when he said that, and I thought to myself, I was like, wow, that's an extreme statement. I mean, like literally, he says we are not figuratively, we are literally stardust. But the reason he said that was because he looked at our bodies from a anatomical standpoint. And as he looked at us and compared it with what we see in the universe, there's this correlation. Well, in my mind, the reason I'm a creationist is for the same reason, because the Bible says God created man out of the dust of the ground. But did you know that many of the elements from the dust are found in man? Think about it. Magnesium, phosphorus, calcium, potassium, sodium, iron, iodine, chlorine. That's why we should choose foods that come from a root system. Because in order to survive and have balanced levels of magnesium and calcium and all these other things, we need to eat food that comes from plant sources. That's the reason why, exactly. So that's the whole concept behind it. Now, is the brain and the mind the same thing? What do you think? Yes or no? Brain and mind, is this the same thing? You see, we're talking about diet and the mind, but we've been looking at a lot that deals with the brain. Sometimes people think that the brain and the mind are the same thing. They're not. So now I'm going to talk to the younger generation. The younger generation can get this because the younger generation knows about computers. They understand these things. Here is the easiest way that I can separate the brain from the mind. Your brain is like a hard drive and your mind is like software. If the hard drive is broken or it's badly damaged, by default, your software is not going to work at optimum level. But if you want the software to work well, you have to make sure you take good care of the hard drive. So when we talk about diet and the mind is that software. It's the way we think and reason and do a lot of these things. If you want to have a healthy mind, you must have a healthy brain. Are you following that? The brain is the organ. You got to take care of your brain nerves. That's why I like this little statement here that says, the brain is the organ and instrument of the mind and controls the whole body. In order for the other parts of the system to be healthy, the brain must be healthy. And in order for the brain to be healthy, the blood must be pure. If by correct habits of eating and drinking, the blood is kept pure, the brain will be properly nourished. So everything we're talking about, the whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods, it's going to feed those brain nerves. And if you have healthy brain, you have the best shot at having healthy mind. This is why, maybe to a degree, there is some truth in the statement, you are what you eat, right? Always remember this, ladies and gentlemen. The food you and I eat gets broken down to blood. That blood is what produces the health of our brains. Our brain is where we house our thoughts. Our thoughts is what produces our actions. Our actions repeated is what ultimately forms our characters. And our character is what determines our destiny. And that's the reason why there is a direct connection. There is a correlation between diet and the mind. And my hope and prayer that I leave with you tonight is, remember this: thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusts in thee. Remember, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And the next time you ever ask God, Lord, what is it that you really want from me? Here's his answer, very clear. My son, give me your heart. The word heart means mind. And let your eyes observe my ways. I want to encourage each of us tonight, take a step. Look at your diet. Look at what you got going on in your home, your refrigerator, your cupboard. Start asking yourself, what area is it that I can take another step in the direction of getting more whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods in my diet so I can make sure that I have the healthiest mind possible? How many of us are willing to do that? Anybody's willing to do that? To say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. I'm going to go ahead and see what more whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods can I put in my diet? I assure you, as you take those steps, you won't be disappointed. You'll be thoroughly happy, all right? This concludes our presentation for tonight. I'm so grateful that we were able to talk about this. I hope that we learned something. Did we learn anything? Did we learn something? Was there something that was like, hey, that's a little new? Okay, good. Well, then I want you to take that with you, and as you get ready to leave here, as Pastor Rod offered a word of prayer to bless every one of us as we go through it, I just want to ask God to bless you as you get ready to leave here and to go home and to get home safe. Let's go ahead and let's pray very quickly. Our loving Father, I want to thank you so much for everyone who came out here tonight. We all learned a lot about diet and the mind. Help us, Lord, to see whatever small step it is that we can take to add more whole, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods in our lives, so that way we can preserve our brain nerves and our minds as much as possible. I pray that you'll bless everyone with safe journeys home, and that they will arrive at their homes in perfect contact with no hurt, harm, no danger that came to it.